God says today, stop worrying, trust me, and I'll give you peace. Word of God. Have you ever felt like you were on the verge of collapse even when everything seemed to be in order? Have you ever woken up with your heart tightening as if being suffocated by something invisible? This silent anguish, this pain that no one sees but that consumes you from within, is what many call anxiety. But to God, it's a cry from your soul. Perhaps you've spent nights trying to understand why your mind won't stop, why your heart is at war, even when everything around you is silent. The feeling of having no control, of being adrift amidst chaos. Does that sound familiar? What if I told you there is a voice, not yours, not the world's, but a sacred and eternal voice that today is saying, stop worrying, trust in me and I will give you peace. You are about to hear something few people have the courage to face, a powerful spiritual truth that has been hidden for centuries under layers of fear, guilt, and religiosity. But today it will be revealed. This message is a key. It's not for everyone. It's for those who are tired of struggling in silence. For those who have tried everything and still feel the weight of the world on their shoulders, God is about to speak directly to your spirit. And when He speaks, the inner storms cease. But before peace comes truth. And this truth will confront, heal, and set you free. Take a deep breath. Open your heart. This is a sacred moment. You are here because Jesus brought you. And if you've reached this video, it's not by chance. Prepare yourself because what you are about to hear may be exactly the answer your soul has been silently searching for years. Don't leave now. The revelation hasn't come yet, but when it does, you'll never be the same. Take a deep breath. Silence everything around you. Because what's about to happen isn't just a video, it's an encounter with God. This message didn't come to you by chance. You were brought here because there's something heaven wants to reveal directly to your heart. If this word has already begun to touch your soul, declare your faith right now in the comments. Lord, I choose to trust you, even without understanding. Let this be your public declaration of faith, of surrender, of spiritual courage. Like this video as an act of faith. When you do, YouTube's algorithm understands that this message needs to reach others who are suffering in silence, just as you may have arrived here, desperately searching for an answer. So if God has spoken to you, let that light reach other hearts that are in the shadows of anxiety, fear, and doubt. Here, you will never walk alone again. Here we are, a community that carries wounds, but also promises. A space where you will be reminded in every video that God still speaks, still cares, and still transforms. Get ready, because Jesus has revealed something profound about your pain, something that changes everything, something you may never have heard so clearly before. And it's about to be revealed to you. Close your eyes for a moment. Breathe. This is the moment God is present, and He wants to speak to you now. Next, we begin to delve into one of the most suffocating pains of the human soul, the anxiety that paralyzes, destroys, and consumes. But what if, in the midst of the storm, Jesus were already saying, "Trust in me, and I will give you peace"? Have you ever felt like you were sinking inside, even though everything seemed normal on the outside? As if an invisible weight were crushing your chest day after day, making even the simple act of breathing seem like a superhuman effort? There's a restlessness that invades your mind, a constant fear that clings to your soul, as if something were always about to go wrong. And the worst? You pray, but peace doesn't come. You cry out, but God's silence seems even more deafening. Anxiety, this modern name for an ancient spiritual pain, is eroding your faith, draining your strength, and slowly extinguishing the hope that things will get better. And in this invisible despair, a question echoes within. God, why can't I trust in your care? Why am I still so afraid? Imagine yourself in a boat, sailing through a dark night, with no stars in the sky, only lightning tearing through the sky. The wind is merciless, and the waves crash with force, as if trying to throw you overboard. The sea is raging, and the boat rocks like a leaf in the wind. In this chaotic scene, where every second seems like your last, you look around in panic, and Jesus is sleeping. That's right. While everything is falling apart, He is at peace. This is exactly what the disciples experienced in Mark 4:35-41. Fear gripped them. The storm was real. The waves were violent. But Jesus was there the whole time, sleeping, calm. Because for him, the sea was never out of control. He knew who he was. He knew he had authority over the wind, over the water, over fear. When they wake him, overcome with terror, Jesus stands and says to the sea, "Peace, be still," and the wind obeys. The sea calms. Silence returns, and then he asks his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Mark 4:40. This question has crossed centuries and comes to you today. Why are you so afraid? Do you still not believe that Jesus is in the boat with you? Maybe your boat is your family, your marriage, your emotional health, your financial instability. Maybe the waves are your racing thoughts, your history of disappointments, or the words hurled at you that still echo like thunder inside your mind. Maybe you've tried to hide, control, ignore. But the truth is, the storm is within you, and no matter how hard you try to keep everything together, you're no longer strong. Anxiety has taken the helm, and you feel like you're going to sink. But pay attention, fear lies. He makes you believe you're alone, but Jesus is still there. He never left the boat. Even when you don't feel him, he's in control. Fear steals perspective. It makes you focus only on the size of the waves and forget who's in the boat with you. And that's why fear paralyzes us, because it makes us forget to trust. But God's invitation today is this: stop worrying, trust in me, and I will give you peace. It's not a suggestion. It's a promise, a guarantee, a living word that carries the power to silence even the most intense internal storms. Maybe you're saying right now, "But I've tried trusting, and nothing has changed." And here's the twist. No one told you. Trusting in God is not waiting for the storm to end. It is resting in the midst of it. It's finding peace before everything gets better. Because true spiritual victory isn't emerging unscathed from the sea, but standing firm in faith while it roars. This is the peace that surpasses all understanding. It's not the absence of problems, it's the presence of Jesus. And here's the secret that few understand. The more you try to control everything, the more anxiety grows. But when you let go, when you surrender, when you decide to trust, even when you tremble, you give God permission to act. Peace doesn't enter where there's still human control. It enters when there's total surrender. Your heart was made to trust, not to carry everything alone. And it's at that very moment that you must choose. Will you continue trying to survive the storm on your own? Or will you awaken Jesus and allow him to take control? Now take a deep breath. Yes, now breathe as if for the first time in days. Close your eyes for a second and imagine this storm inside you being silenced by a single word from him. Calm down. The wind bends, the waves retreat, and a sacred silence invades the soul. This is the power of his presence. No matter how chaotic it is on the outside, if Jesus is at the center, you can rest. But be careful. This peace will not come if you continue to entertain thoughts that distance you from God. You need to replace the noise of worry with the voice of the promise, and it tells you, "Trust in me, and I will give you rest." This is today's call. Stop fighting what you can't control. Stop carrying burdens that weren't meant for you. And start believing again like a child believes in his father, with simplicity, with faith, with surrender. If this word spoke to you, write now in the comments, "Jesus, I place the helm of my life in your hands." Let this comment be your public act of trust, a declaration that you will no longer drown in your own anxiety, that you believe, even without seeing, that you trust, even when afraid, and that you decide today to stop worrying and rest in the one who has the power to calm the sea. But there is something even deeper that needs to be revealed, something no one ever told you about the exhaustion of fighting alone. You've carried this pain for too long. But what's about to be exposed could be exactly the key to the liberation you've been waiting for. What if I told you that exhaustion of the soul is not always a lack of faith, but a divine call to the rest that only heaven can offer? Get ready. What you're about to hear could change everything. Have you ever reached that point where your body is standing but your soul is on its knees? When fatigue goes beyond the physical and settles deep within your spirit. There are people who walk, work, smile, But inside, they're exhausted, and it's not from lack of sleep. It's the weight of life. It's the responsibility no one sees, the conflicts no one understands, the feelings no one hears. And when you try to explain, they say, "Be strong, it will pass." But it doesn't, because it's not just sadness. It's overwhelm. It's the accumulation of wounds, pressures, traumas, obligations, and a heart that silently begs for rest. And the most painful thing is not the burden. It is the loneliness of carrying it without help. You pray, but feel weak. You read the word, but nothing seems to sink in. You attend church, but return home with your soul even more exhausted, because there's a kind of fatigue that isn't physical, it's existential. A fatigue from battling every day against your own thoughts, against guilt, against the fear of failure, against the desperation of being enough for everyone, and yet feeling empty. Maybe you're there right now, listening to this message with tears in your eyes, and the only question you can ask is, "Lord, how long? How long will I have to be strong without strength? How long will I smile hiding my scream?" And it is in that moment of weakness, when everything in you cries out for relief, that the voice of Jesus echoes in Matthew 11:28. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." He didn't say, "I will strengthen you so you can endure a little longer." He said, "I will give you rest." Because there is a place in God where the weariness of the soul finds healing, where exhaustion is not judged, but welcomed, where the weight is lifted, not by effort, but by surrender. This word is for you who are trying to hold on to everything while your faith slips through your fingers, for you who have thought about giving up, not for lack of faith, but for being overweight. Jesus knew we would get here. He knew there would be days when the simple act of getting out of bed would be a victory. So before the world demanded your performance, he invited you, come. And this come is unconditional. It doesn't say come happy or come strong. It simply says come, tired, confused, broken. Wounded Jesus isn't looking for the perfect. He's waiting for the exhausted. But there is one detail in this invitation that changes everything. He goes on to say in the next verse, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." Matthew 11:29. This means that rest isn't just about stopping, but about exchanging the burden, in letting go of what was never yours, in learning from him. And this is liberating, because many of us are burdened not because of life, but because we try to be gods of our own stories. We want to control everything, solve everything, predict everything, but we were created to depend. And that's not weakness, it's faith. How many times have you felt bad about not being able to handle everything? How many times have you blamed yourself for not being strong enough, patient enough, spiritual enough? But what if I told you that this pressure doesn't come from God, but from the world, or worse, from your own wounded mind? What if what you call weakness is actually a sacred calling to rest in God? Jesus doesn't love you more when you succeed, nor less when you fail. He loves you, period. And in this love, there is no pressure, there is grace, there is relief. Now take a deep breath. Yes, one more time. Close your eyes for a few seconds and feel the weight on your shoulders. This weight could be called anxiety, pressure, guilt, fear, responsibilities, past pain, or broken promises. Now imagine Jesus approaching and extending his hands, saying, "Give it to me, trust me. Let me take care of it." Can you imagine this moment? Surrender is real, and it is in this instant that liberation begins. Maybe you've never learned to rest in God. Maybe you've learned to do, to conquer, to obey, but not to trust. Because trust requires surrender, and surrender requires humility. But the secret lies right there. It is in brokenness that rest is revealed. It's when you say, "I can't do it alone," that God responds, "That's what I've been waiting to hear." If this word found your heart at the very moment of your exhaustion, declare now in the comments, "Lord, I accept your invitation and rest in you." May it be a spiritual decision, a profound surrender, a public declaration that you no longer want to survive on your own. You want to learn to live with ease and peace, trusting fully in Jesus' promise. But there's something you might not have realized yet, and when you do, it will all make sense. because there's a kind of fatigue that sets in not from overwork, but from a lack of purpose. And that's exactly what we'll talk about next. What to do when the fear of failure becomes greater than the will to keep going. What comes next may confront your deepest beliefs and free your soul from an invisible prison. Brace yourself. What you're about to discover may be what your soul has been silently yearning for years. Have you ever felt like you were on the verge of something great, but paralyzed inside? As if there was a dream pulsing within you, a clear direction, a promise from God, but still, something is holding you back from taking the next step. And that something is called fear, the fear of failure, the fear of taking risks and failing, the fear of disappointing others, the fear of not being enough, the fear of trying one more time and failing. This spiritual paralysis isn't born from a lack of faith, but from the excessive presence of untreated wounds. And that's why, even knowing what God wants, you hesitate, because the memory of the previous failure still screams within you. And secretly, you wonder, will it be different this time? Peter knew this fear well. The scene is familiar. Jesus comes walking on the water, and all the disciples think he's a ghost. The sea is rough, the winds are strong, and darkness covers the horizon. Jesus says, "It is I, do not be afraid." And Peter, in a burst of faith and desire, responds, "If it is the Lord, tell me to come to you, walking on the water." Jesus says, "Come." Peter steps out of the boat. Yes, he steps on the impossible. He defies logic. He walks on what should sink him. But suddenly he notices the wind. He hears the roar of the storm. He looks around. He takes his eyes off Jesus and begins to sink. The scene is found in Matthew 14:22-33, and Jesus' question resonates to this day. "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" Have you ever found yourself in this place? Halfway between faith and failure? Between the first courageous step and the seemingly inevitable fall? The truth is, many of us have enough faith to begin, but not enough confidence to continue. Because fear silently convinces us we're frauds, and then you start to wonder, who am I to dream of this? Did I hear God correctly? What if I try and it doesn't work out again? These voices create internal prisons, and what was once a calling becomes a burden. What was once a promise now feels like a threat. But do you know what truth sets you free? Jesus never asked you for perfection. He only asked that you look to him. Peter didn't sink because the sea grew rougher. He sank because he looked away. The root of failure isn't the storm, but the focus. While his eyes were fixed on Jesus, he did the impossible. When he turned his attention to the problem, he lost his way. And this repeats itself in our lives. When we look to fear, to trauma, to the past, we sink. But when we fix our eyes on the one who never fails, we walk over what should destroy us. But there is an even deeper revelation here. When Peter begins to sink, he cries out, "Lord, save me!" And immediately, not later, not with delay, immediately, Jesus reaches out and holds you. This is powerful, because even when faith fails, his love remains. Even when you doubt, he remains steadfast. Even when you fall, he doesn't give up. This is not just encouragement, it is liberation. Because it means that security is not in your strength, but in the hand that holds you, and that hand never fails. So why does fear still control you? Why are you still stuck between promise and execution? Because you still believe the outcome depends on you. But true spiritual rest comes when you understand that you don't have to control everything. You need to trust. And trust is not the absence of fear. Trust is moving forward despite fear, with our eyes fixed on the word of Jesus. You weren't called to live in fear of failure. You were called to walk by faith, and faith doesn't guarantee you'll never fall. But it does guarantee that Jesus will always lift you up. If he called you, he will sustain you. If he commanded you to come, he has already prepared the way, even if the sea still seems rough. Don't wait for the storm to subside to obey. Peace is not in circumstances. It is in trust. It is in the certainty that Jesus is watching over you. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine Jesus calling you, not in anger, not in haste, but with love, with that gaze that sees beyond fear, beyond the past, beyond doubt. He's saying, "Come, this is your time. This is the moment to free yourself from the spiritual paralysis that fear has caused. Leave behind the voices that tell you you're not capable, that you'll fail, that you weren't born for this, and trust, truly trust. Because when you trust, peace enters, and when peace enters, fear leaves. If this word touched your heart and you recognize that you are afraid of failing, write now in the comments, "Lord, even though I am afraid, I choose to trust in you." Let this be your spiritual declaration of courage, a decision against everything that holds you back, a step toward the promise God has planted within you. But there is a question that needs to be asked, and perhaps you have never had the courage to face it. Could the restlessness in your soul be the result of fear or a lack of purpose? What you'll discover next may challenge everything you believed about your own anxiety. What if what you feel is not weakness, but a calling you have been ignoring? Brace yourself. There's a hidden revelation that could completely change the way you view your worries. What's coming next is deeper than it seems, and it may be exactly the answer you've always sought, but never knew how to put into words. Sometimes the loudest noise isn't outside, but inside the mind doesn't stop. Thoughts race, and even when everything around you seems silent, a storm rages inside. You try to rest, but sleep won't come. You try to pray, but your thoughts interrupt. You try to hear God, but there's so much noise in your heart that his voice seems distant. This restlessness that won't calm, this constant urgency, this feeling that there's always something to do, to resolve, to fix, is draining your peace and taking you away from what truly matters. Your body is present, but your soul is in 1,000 places at once. Have you ever felt this way? This is exactly what Jesus saw in Martha's eyes. The scene is simple yet profound. Jesus visits the home of two sisters, Martha and Mary. While Mary sits at Jesus' feet, listening attentively and devotedly to every word, Martha is busy. She's rushing around, preparing everything, worrying about details, trying to please, trying to maintain control, trying to make it all work. But something inside her is breaking down. Because it's not just about the house being in order, it's about her heart being restless. And so, when Martha complains to Jesus, asking him to send Mary to help her, he responds with something that spans the centuries and still resonates with us today. "Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen the better part, and it will not be taken away from her." Lucas 10:41-42. Jesus' response isn't an aggressive correction, but a loving call. It's as if he's saying, "Martha, stop. Breathe, I'm here. You don't need to worry so much, you just need to listen to me." How often have you lived like Martha, even though you long to be like Mary? How many times have you allowed tasks, urgencies, demands, and fears to take the place of what's essential? How many times have you tried to solve everything yourself, when the only thing Jesus asked was, "Sit down. Just stay with me, listen. Rest." Martha's restlessness reflects our modern heart. We live in a rush, worrying about tomorrow, trying to control what is beyond our reach. And we forget that the peace God promises doesn't come from doing more, but from being closer. It's not productivity, it's presence. It's not a full schedule. It's an empty soul for him to fill. Jesus isn't inviting us to be efficient. He's calling us to be intimate. But there's something even deeper here. Martha was doing something good. She was serving, preparing the house, taking care of the detail, and yet she was restless. This shows us that even good things can become burdens when done without resting in God. When our identity is placed in what we do, rather than in who He is, our soul becomes hostage to performance. Have you ever stopped to consider that perhaps your anxiety doesn't come from what's going wrong, but from the excess weight you're trying to carry alone? Mary chose the better part, sitting at Jesus' feet, and Jesus said that this would not be taken away from her. In other words, what you receive in intimacy with God is eternal. It cannot be stolen. It does not get lost over time. It does not wear out with circumstances. And this is precisely what many have neglected, because the restlessness of the heart always tries to sabotage intimacy with the Father. But it is precisely the opposite. It is in rest that faith flourishes. It is in presence that healing occurs. It is in silence at the feet of Jesus that peace is revealed. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself in that room. Imagine Jesus entering your home, looking at you tenderly. You're rushing around, doing 1,000 things, trying to keep everything under control. But he just comes over, takes your hand, and says, "You're restless, but I'm here. Sit down, just be with me." This image isn't poetry. It's real. It's what heaven is saying about you right now. Stop trying to carry it all. Choose the best part. It's still available. If this word has confronted you and you recognize that you have been living like Martha, declare in the comments, "Jesus, I choose to listen to you above all else." Let this declaration be your act of spiritual realignment, a conscious decision to no longer live hostage to the world's urgencies, but to focus on the essential, the presence of God. But there is something that few realize, and perhaps it is the secret cause of their restlessness. What if your heart wasn't restless from lack of time, but from too many voices? What you're about to discover could free your mind from a cycle of confusion and stress you didn't even know you were experiencing. Get ready. What's coming next could be the key to regaining the peace you've been searching for, the peace the world can't offer. There are times when the deepest pain isn't the one that screams, but the one that remains silent. Have you ever been surrounded by people, friends, family, even fellow believers, but felt as if no one truly saw you? As if your presence were invisible, your struggles irrelevant, your feelings worthless? Loneliness, when it happens in silence, hurts more than any physical isolation. It's the kind of emptiness that consumes you from within, because there's no noise, there's absence. And this absence hurts. Your soul becomes silent, your chest tightens, and your prayer begins to feel like an echo that never returns. It's as if everyone passes by you, but no one truly stops. This is exactly how a woman mentioned in Mark 5 lived for 12 years. A woman who isn't even named in the text. She was known only for her pain, the woman with the issue of blood. 12 years bleeding. 12 years being considered impure, rejected, shunned by society, forbidden to touch others. Her problem wasn't just physical, it was emotional. It was spiritual. It was social. She couldn't hug, couldn't be hugged. She couldn't participate in ordinary life, in collective faith, in fellowship with others. She was alive, but disconnected from everything. Can you imagine this woman's loneliness? Waking up every day in pain, shame, and exhaustion. Every failed attempt at healing, every doctor who touched her without providing a solution, every coin spent that took away a little more hope. She no longer had health, resources, or companionship. She had only one thing: faith. And it was with this wounded and silent faith that she decided to do something unthinkable. She heard that Jesus was passing by, and even without permission, even afraid, even bleeding, she stepped out into the crowd. Think of the scene. A woman considered unclean, slipping among the people, risking being stoned for being there. But she didn't want a speech. She didn't want a place of honor. She just wanted to touch the hem of Jesus's cloak. That's all, just a touch. Because she said to herself, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Mark 5:28. This kind of faith doesn't shout, it whispers. But it moves heaven. And when it touches, the miracle happens. Instantly, the bleeding stops. The body feels it. The soul perceives it. Healing has come. But the most amazing thing was yet to come. Jesus stops. Amidst a crowd pressing in on him from all sides, he feels someone touch him with faith, and he asks, "Who touched me?" The disciples find the question strange. After all, everyone was touching. But Jesus knew. That touch was different. It wasn't a touch of curiosity. It was of desperation, of faith, of pain, of surrender. The woman, afraid, reveals herself. And what Jesus does next is the true miracle. He looks at her and says, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be free from your suffering." Marcos 5:34. The first word Jesus says to this woman is daughter. For the first time in 12 years, someone calls her something other than her pain. He doesn't call her sick or impure or sinful. He calls her daughter. This is the true miracle. Jesus didn't just heal the body. He healed the identity. He restored value. He gave belonging. He showed that even if the world doesn't see, God sees. Even if everyone rejects it, he extends his hand. Even if no one hears your pain, the sky answers. And how many people today are experiencing this same loneliness? How many people live with the weight of invisible pain, silently crying out for a miracle? You may be one of them. You may be feeling ignored, forgotten, disbelieved. But there's powerful news for your heart right now. Jesus is still in the midst of the crowd, and he still stops because of a touch of faith. The peace he promises isn't just the absence of problems. It's the presence of purpose, it's restored identity. It's the love that meets you right where you are, even when no one else notices. And maybe, like that woman, you don't have the strength to pray out loud. But your heart can touch Jesus now. You don't need to shout. Just believe, because he is attentive to your pain. He feels it when you touch him with faith. It doesn't matter if it's a whispered prayer, a distressed thought, a solitary tear. What matters is that you are not invisible. God sees you. God hears you. God loves you. If this word reached you in the midst of your loneliness, comment now. Jesus, see me in the midst of the crowd. Not just a phrase, but a cry, a spiritual declaration. A silent plea that rises to the Father's throne and moves the Son's heart. Let this comment be your way of saying, I still believe that touching you can change everything. But wait, there's something few understand about the pain of invisibility, and what you're about to discover may explain why you still feel that emptiness even after praying. What if the problem isn't God's silence, but how you interpret that silence? What comes next may be the most profound moment of this journey. Prepare yourself. Your soul is about to be confronted with a truth that could set you free forever. Have you ever felt like your soul was screaming, but no one could hear? As if something inside you was begging for rest, but the world around you was demanding constant movement? It's the kind of exhaustion that can't be resolved with a few hours of sleep. It's an existential fatigue, an exhaustion of the soul. You wake up and you're already tired. You take a deep breath but feel no relief. You close your eyes to pray, but your mind keeps racing. And deep down, the feeling that dominates is that everything is hanging by a thread, as if something about to break lives within you. This restlessness doesn't come just from the body, it comes from an overburdened heart, an anxious mind, an exhausted spirit. And at this point, it's not always easy to realize that what you need isn't a vacation, nor immediate answers, but peace. Peace that doesn't come from circumstances, peace that doesn't depend on what's happening outside, peace that can only be given by God. And it's no coincidence that in one of the most chaotic moments of the disciples' lives, Jesus decided to sleep. The scene is intense. They were in the boat, crossing the sea, when a violent storm began to threaten the vessel. Waves crashed on all sides. The wind was strong. The water began to flood, and in the midst of the panic, Jesus slept. Yes, he slept. Not because he was ignorant of the situation, but because he was above it. Not because he didn't care, but because he knew who he was. The disciples, in desperation, ran to him and said, "Teacher, don't you care if we perish?" Mark 4:38. And here is a pain you may know well. Fear disguised as prayer. The feeling of abandonment in the midst of chaos. The question that echoes in the hearts of those who don't understand God's silence. Doesn't the Lord care about me? But Jesus stands up. He looks at the wind, he speaks to the waves, and says, "Be still, be still." And suddenly, there was a great calm. Mark 4:39. What was noise became silence. What was threat became peace. And then Jesus turns to the disciples and asks, "Why are you so afraid? Have you no faith?" Mark 4:40. This question was not an accusation, but an invitation. An invitation to exchange fear for trust, panic for presence, despair for rest. And here's the key your soul may be seeking. God's peace isn't the absence of storms. It's the presence of trust. It's not when everything around you calms down. It's when you allow yourself to rest, even while everything outside is falling apart. But this is only possible when you understand something the disciples hadn't yet grasped at that moment. Jesus wasn't in the boat to stop the storms. He was there to ensure the boat didn't sink. Your soul isn't screaming for quick fixes. It's crying out for true security. And true security isn't control. It's trust. It's surrender. It's knowing that even when everything seems out of whack, God remains in control. And this kind of rest is spiritual. It's the rest that lifts the weight of self-sufficiency. That silences the voices of fear that calms racing thoughts and reminds you, you don't have to carry it all alone. How many times have you found yourself trying to figure everything out? Trying to be strong for everyone? Trying to maintain the appearance that everything is okay while inside you feel like you're about to collapse? But what if this collapse is actually a call for rest? What if this exhaustion you feel is a divine cry saying, "Stop, sit down, trust. I've got you covered." The world says to keep running, faith says to rest. Jesus was in the boat. He knew the storm was coming before it began, and yet he chose to sleep. This is a powerful message. You can rest when God is in control, because the peace he offers isn't an emotion, it's a person. It's himself. And the question you need to ask yourself today is, why do you still insist on trying to control what only God can calm? If this word resonates with your weary heart, write in the comments, "Jesus, my soul needs your rest." Let this be your written prayer, your cry for help, your silent surrender. Perhaps it will be the cry that finally makes room for the calm you've been searching for. But wait, what if the reason for your fatigue isn't overwork, but the kind of battle you've chosen to fight? What you're about to hear may reveal why you're constantly trying to solve what you only surrender to. What if your greatest strength lies hidden precisely in your most denied weakness? What comes next could be the game changer your spirit has been waiting for. Get ready. There's a spiritual secret about to be revealed, and it has the power to restore the peace that was stolen from you. Sometimes what takes away your peace isn't an external problem, but a silent battle raging within your mind. You pray, but feel no answer. You read the Bible, but don't understand. You seek direction, but find only silence. Then, without realizing it, you begin to question, does God really hear me? Am I doing everything wrong? What if he's forgotten me? These thoughts don't arise out of nowhere. They are built brick by unresolved experiences, by promises that seem unfulfilled, and by wounds that, though hidden, remain raw. Doubt is sneaky. It doesn't scream, it whispers, "What if it's all in vain?" And this whisper, repeated long enough, begins to erode the foundation of faith. This kind of crisis is not new. The Bible does not hide the failings of men of faith, and perhaps the most famous doubter is Thomas. He was not with the disciples when the resurrected Jesus first appeared, and when his friends, their eyes shining, told them what they had seen, he was blunt. "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger in them, and my hand into his side, I will not believe." John 20:25. Thomas needed proof. He wanted signs. He wanted something concrete, but in truth, what he really needed was healing. Healing from disappointment, healing from frustration, healing from grief. Have you ever considered that perhaps your doubt is also the result of something that hasn't yet been healed within you? That perhaps it's not a lack of faith, but excessive pain? That your soul is too wounded to believe easily? And do you know what's most beautiful about this story? Jesus doesn't rebuke Thomas. He appears 8 days later, even though Thomas hadn't prayed for it, even though he didn't deserve it. Jesus appears and says, "Put your finger here, see my hands, reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." John 20:27. Jesus doesn't ignore the pain that generates doubt. He enters into it. He invites Thomas to touch his wounds, not to judge, but to restore, because true faith isn't about the absence of questions. It's about choosing to trust, even when you don't have all the answers. It's about looking at Jesus' scars and understanding. He too knows what it's like to suffer. He too bled. He too faced the silence of heaven. But he overcame, and today he invites you to overcome too. The peace you so desperately seek won't come when you have all the certainties. It begins when you accept that Jesus' presence is enough, that even with doubts, fears, and scars, he still reveals himself. And when he reveals himself, everything changes. Thomas, who once said, "I do not believe," now declares, "My Lord and my God." John 20:28. It was a powerful confession, because the moment his doubt was confronted with Jesus' presence, it was overcome. And perhaps today you're like Thomas, wanting proof, feeling your faith is weak, afraid of being disappointed again. But Jesus tells you, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." John 20:29. This isn't a scolding. It's an invitation to spiritual maturity. It's as if Jesus were saying, You can continue to need to see, or you can choose to trust. And trust, sometimes, is the most radical form of worship, because it's looking at the invisible and saying, even without understanding, I know the Lord is here. Your faith doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be real. Jesus isn't looking for unbeatable faith, but for willing hearts. Hearts that, even when wounded, continue to seek. That even when tired, continue to pray. That, even when full of questions, continue to say, stay with me, Lord. And it is in this place that true peace manifests itself. Because the peace God offers doesn't depend on immediate answers. It arises when you surrender your questions to Him. If this message confronted your doubt and reminded you that God is not offended by your sincere questions, write in the comments, Jesus, even without seeing, I choose to trust. May this declaration not be just a phrase, but a step of faith, an act of spiritual courage. A silent surrender that says, I don't understand everything, but I know the Lord is faithful. But what if I told you that many of your doubts aren't spiritual, but emotional, and that there's a weight on your heart that's distorting even the way you see God? What comes next may be the answer you've been searching for so long, a secret hidden between the lines of pain, and which may be the key to the peace your soul so desperately craves. It's strange how tomorrow, which hasn't even arrived yet, can weigh so heavily on today. There are people who can barely breathe in the present because they're suffocated by worries about the future. And the scariest thing is that this fear of what hasn't yet happened paralyzes, exhausts, weakens. The heart races, the mind anticipates tragic scenarios, and the soul, distressed, begins to wonder, what if it goes wrong? What if I can't cope? What if nothing changes? This kind of anguish respects no time or place. It appears in the middle of the night, in prolonged silences, in stares lost in the void. And behind every anxious thought is a heart screaming for help, peace, for some certainty, for some sign that you won't be abandoned along the way. But what if I told you that this constant anguish has a spiritual origin? That the fear of tomorrow arises from the false idea that you need to have everything under control? In the desert, the people of Israel faced this dilemma every day. After being freed from Egypt, they were in the middle of nowhere, no food supply, no clear route, no human security. They had only one thing, God's promise. And yet they doubted, they murmured, they panicked. Then the Lord established a pattern that seemed crazy. He would provide daily bread, but only what was needed for that day. The manna fell from the sky early in the morning, fresh and sufficient. If anyone tried to save it for the next day, it would rot. Exodus 16:19-20. God was teaching something profound. Trust cannot be stored. It needs to be renewed daily. Perhaps you're trying to store emotional security based on human certainties. Perhaps your mind is constantly searching for guarantees, strategies, plan Bs, and the result, a restless, overwhelmed soul, tired of calculating future scenarios that may never happen. Jesus knew this. And that's why he said, therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Matthew 6:34. This is not a call to irresponsibility. It is an invitation to dependence. It is as if Jesus were saying, be concerned about trusting today. I will take care of tomorrow. Have you ever noticed how anxiety steals the present? How it prevents you from noticing the miracles that are already happening? The people in the desert had bread falling from the sky, but they still worried about what they didn't know. So it is with us. We have today's grace, but we fear tomorrow's scarcity. We have the promise that God is present, but we tremble at the thought of what we have yet to face, and the result is a restless heart, always occupied with the unseen, always reacting to ghosts of the future. But here's the truth that few accept. The fear of tomorrow reveals a faith that has not yet learned to rest. And resting isn't giving up. It's trusting. It's walking, even without seeing, knowing that God is already where you haven't even arrived yet. It's understanding that if He sustained you today, He will sustain you tomorrow too. The manna didn't fall in advance. It was daily, and it was sufficient. This is divine logic. Daily sufficiency, not anxious abundance. Have you ever tried so hard to plan for the future that you forgot to live in the present? Have you ever searched so intensely for answers that you stopped hearing God's voice today? Maybe it's time to take a step back, to return to the basics of faith. One surrender a day, one trust at a time, one step of faith. You don't need to know what next month will bring. You just need to trust that today's bread has been delivered, and that the peace that surpasses all understanding is available now. And do you know what's most beautiful about this journey? It's that Jesus didn't just talk about not worrying. He lived it, even knowing what awaited him. Betrayal, cross, pain. He didn't live in constant agony. He served, healed, taught, loved, because his trust in the Father didn't depend on circumstances. He knew tomorrow belongs to God, and this is the peace he offers us. A peace that doesn't need human guarantees to exist. A peace that allows us to live in the present with gratitude, without the crushing burden of what is yet to come. If this message confronted your fear and reminded you that tomorrow belongs to God, write in the comments, "Lord, today I choose to trust in your care." Let this be your prayer of deliverance, your declaration of war against anxiety, your commitment to live by faith, one day at a time. But wait, what if I told you that the real battlefield isn't the future, but your mind right now? And that the root of anxiety may be hidden in thought patterns you're no longer even aware of. What you're about to hear next may reveal the secret torn to your mind and break this cycle of restlessness that steals your peace. Get ready, because what's coming could change everything you believe about the power of your thoughts. Have you ever felt like your own mind was your biggest battlefield? As if negative thoughts, doubts, painful memories, and incessant worries waged war within you day and night? It's not a battle others see. Sometimes you're smiling on the outside, but inside the confusion is deafening. And the more you try to silence the inner voices, the louder they scream, "You'll never win this. You're a failure. Nobody cares." It's as if something is trying to destroy your peace from the inside out. And if there's one thing Satan has mastered, it's occupying the most strategic field in your life, your mind. The Bible reveals to us that the mind is spiritual terrain. Paul understood this profoundly when he wrote to the Romans, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Romans 12:2. This word, renewal, carries the idea of a complete overhaul, as if God were saying, you don't just need to think differently, you need a complete rebuilding. Because what happens in your mind directly affects what happens in your heart, your emotions, and even your faith. Thoughts aren't just thoughts, they are seeds. And depending on what you water every day, you could be cultivating either God's peace or the enemy's chaos. Paul also says in 2 Corinthians 10:5 that we should take captive every thought to the obedience of Christ. This means that there are thoughts that aren't yours, that not every idea that crosses your mind is true, that some inner voices are actually lies planted to keep you in spiritual captivity. And what few realize is that the mind becomes a territory of emotional slavery when it's not aligned with God's word. You can have a seemingly successful life, but if your mind is an environment of toxic thoughts, your soul will remain restless. Because true peace doesn't come from the outside in. It's born from the transformation that begins in the mind and reaches the heart. Maybe you've been fighting an invisible war for years. Recurring thoughts of failure, memories of the past that still hurt you, fears of the future that steal your hope, voices that tell you you're not enough, that God has forgotten you, that you're alone. But what if I told you this isn't just psychological, it's spiritual? What if the greatest liberation you need isn't external, but in your mind? The truth is that many are destroying themselves inside because they have believed lies for too long, words they heard in childhood, unhealed traumas, internalized criticisms. The enemy works like this. He plants a lie and hopes you accept it as truth. And when you accept it, he builds a fortress in your mind, a thought structure that blocks the peace of God. But the good news is that the word has the power to demolish these fortresses, not with human strength, but with the truth of the Spirit. When you speak the word over your thoughts, you begin to rescue the territory of your inner peace. You break patterns, you rewrite narratives. You trade fear for faith, guilt for grace, chaos for rest. But this requires discipline. The mind doesn't change by magic. It is renewed by constancy in the presence of God. That's why praying, meditating on the word, fasting, and declaring the promises are not empty rituals. They are spiritual weapons. They are tools given by God to help you fight and win the invisible war that torments you. And perhaps you're waiting to feel something before acting, but faith doesn't always come with emotion. Sometimes it demands action amidst emptiness. You may wake up feeling overwhelmed, yet still declare, "The peace of Christ rules my mind." You may be suffocated by anxious thoughts, yet still say, "I trust in the promise the Lord has made to me." Because this is what the renewal of the mind requires. Repetition of faith in the face of repetition of fear. It's not easy, but it's possible. And just because your thoughts are disordered doesn't mean your faith is lost. It's because your mind needs to be trained to believe, trained to rest, trained to reject what doesn't come from God. And when this begins to happen, you feel a profound transformation. You realize that what once consumed you no longer has power. You begin to live in peace even when everything around you remains the same. Because the miracle happened in a place where no one sees it, inside you. If this word confronted the war you are experiencing in your mind, declare with faith in the comments, "Lord, take my thoughts and renew my mind." May this not be just a phrase, but a cry from your heart, a profound surrender, a cry of liberation from everything that has robbed you of your spiritual sanity. But there's something that almost no one realizes, and when you understand it, everything will make sense. God's silence, which so many fear, isn't always absence. Sometimes it's the stage for a miracle to unfold. What you hear next could completely change how you view God's apparent abandonment. And the revelation that comes may be what your heart has always sought without knowing it. Is it possible to continue believing when heaven remains silent? When you pray with tears in your eyes, fasting, crying out, and still hear nothing? No answer. No direction, no change. This is when many give up, not for lack of faith, but because they can't bear the silence. Because God's silence feels like abandonment. It feels like rejection, it feels like He doesn't care. But what if I told you that this silence carries more purpose than you imagine? What if the silence isn't a sign that God has left you, but rather evidence that something much greater is being prepared? Lazarus was sick. His sisters Martha and Mary knew Jesus loved him deeply. So they sent a message, "Lord, the one you love is sick." John 11:3. It was a desperate plea. They knew of Jesus' power. They had seen miracles. They were convinced that if He came, everything would change. But Jesus didn't come. He stayed where He was for 2 more days, and Lazarus died. The pain of waiting turned to mourning. Expectation turned to disappointment. Imagine Martha's despair as she watched her brother leave, believing Jesus would return at any moment, and He didn't. Time passed and everything fell silent. How often does this happen to you too? You pray with hope, wait with faith, but nothing changes. The illness advances. The situation worsens. The door doesn't open. The answer doesn't come. And God's silence begins to shout louder than your faith. You wonder, did He hear me? Was my prayer in vain? Am I alone? But here's something few realize. Jesus wasn't late. He had a plan. He said, "This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it." John 11:4. In other words, what seemed like a tragedy was actually a stage for the manifestation of something greater. The time of silence was the time for the miracle to be built. When Jesus finally arrives, Martha goes to meet Him and says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." John 11:21. This phrase carries pain, but also hope. It's as if she were saying, "You didn't come when I needed you most, but even so, I still believe." And Jesus responds with something that would change everything. "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live." John 11:25. What seemed irreversible was about to be reversed. What was decreed as the end was only the beginning of a new story, but the miracle only happened after the silence. This story teaches us something profound. God's silence is not an absence of love. It is preparation for something that can only be born when everything seems lost, because there are levels of faith that are only activated when the last human hope dies. Jesus didn't come to heal Lazarus, He came to raise him from the dead. And that difference changes everything. What you think God should have done maybe isn't what He's doing. Because what you want is healing, but what He wants is revelation. What you want is immediate relief, but what he wants is eternal transformation. And that takes time, it takes silence. Have you ever felt this way? Like Martha and Mary? Waiting for an answer that never seems to come? Carrying a grief that could have been avoided if God had acted in time? The good news is that he is still coming. Even if it seems too late, Jesus is still on the way. Even if the body has been in the tomb for 4 days, even if everyone has lost hope, he can still say, "Take away the stone." John 11:39. Because as long as there is faith, there is possibility. As long as there is trust, there is renewal. And when Jesus calls, "Lazarus, come out," even the one who was already dead responds, "Your story isn't over yet." Your silence isn't a sentence, it's an interval, a pause between the cry and the response. And it's in this space that God builds the invisible. You can't see it, but he's acting. You can't hear it, but he's moving everything. Because he doesn't need to shout to prove he's present. He is God, and he works even in silence. If this word spoke to your soul, wounded by unanswered prayers, write in the comments, "Lord, even in silence, I choose to continue trusting." Make this your prayer. Your resistance, your faith that survives the noise of absence, a faith that doesn't give up even without explanation. But what if the pain you feel isn't because God is far away, but because your heart can't forgive itself? What you're about to discover may be the key to unlocking a level of peace you never imagined possible. Because sometimes what keeps you trapped in suffering isn't God's silence, but the guilt you refuse to let go of. Prepare yourself for something that goes straight to the root of your most intimate pain. Is it possible to trust God when the greatest weight you carry is not outside, but inside you? When the problem is not the world around you, but the voices inside your conscience that never stop accusing you? There are pains that hurt, but there are guilts that imprison. They accumulate in long silences, in memories that return without warning, in phrases like, "If only I had done things differently. If only I hadn't failed. If only I were better." Guilt has the power to paralyze. It can impede prayer, block communion, and stifle faith. And worst of all, it often disguises itself as regret, but in reality, it's an emotional prison built by shame. It's in this dark place that many live, believing that their mistake nullified God's promise. Jesus knew that guilt would be one of the enemy's greatest strategies against God's children, because it has the power to make someone give up before they even try to start over. And the Bible shows us this profoundly in the parable of the prodigal son, a young man who, in a hurry, demanded his father's inheritance before his time. This, in a Jewish cultural context, was like saying, "Father, to me you are already dead." He broke his honor, broke his bonds, and left. He sought freedom, but found hunger. He sought pleasure, but found ruin. And when he was among the pigs, eating scraps, the only thing left was regret, mixed with shame. The Bible says, when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have enough food to eat, and here I am dying of hunger?" Luke 15:17. He decides to return, but notices how he plans the reunion. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants." Luke 15:18-19. The guilt was so great that he no longer saw himself as a son. He didn't want forgiveness. He wanted punishment. He thought what he did disqualified him forever. And perhaps you feel the same way. Maybe you think you've failed too much, that you've fallen too far, that you've strayed so far that God no longer has any reason to restore you. But what happens next reveals the nature of the Father's heart. The Father sees his son from afar. This means he was waiting. Even after everything, he runs to meet his son, hugs him, and kisses him. Before the boy can even finish his guilty speech, the father lovingly interrupts him. He doesn't respond to the request for punishment. He calls the servants and says, "Quickly, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's celebrate." Luke 15:22-23. The father doesn't welcome him as a servant, but as heir restores as a son. Because guilt is the language of condemnation, but God's love speaks of restoration. And here's the big twist. God doesn't expect you to come back perfect. He just expects you to come back. The peace he promises is not born of your performance, but of your surrender. Guilt paralyzes because it is based on what you have done, but faith frees you because it is based on what Jesus did for you. The cross was not a symbolic act, it was a complete payment. Every mistake, every failure, every sin, they were nailed there. And when Jesus said, "It is finished," he was saying, the debt has been paid. Guilt no longer has power over you. Yet, many prefer to live as fearful servants rather than as restored children. You may be wondering, but has God really forgiven me? Can he still use me? Does my story still have value? And the answer is clear. Sim, you may have failed. You may have run away. You may have wasted opportunities. But the Father's love is greater than your worst failure. Your past does not define your destiny. The shame that suffocates you today may be the testimony that will free others tomorrow. But for that to happen, you need to stop running from God and start running to him. Stop and think. Who would you be today if guilt hadn't paralyzed you? How many prayers have you stopped saying because you felt unworthy? How many dreams have you abandoned because you thought you no longer deserved them? How many times have you remained silent before God, not for lack of faith, but because of excessive shame? The good news is that the Father still has open arms. He still runs toward you. He still calls you his son. He still wants to dress you in new clothes, but you need to go back. Not with justifications, not with promises, but with a broken heart. Because what he wants is not your explanation. It's your presence. If this word touched a wound you've been hiding for so long, write in the comments, "Father, I return to you as a son, not as a servant." Let this be your declaration of freedom, of surrender, of return to the love that never rejected you. But what if I told you that there are people who, even though they believe, even though they serve, still live as if God had given up on them? What's about to be revealed may deconstruct the weight of spiritual exhaustion you've carried for years, because perhaps your pain is no longer about what you did, but about how far you've strayed from who you were when you still believed. What comes next may rekindle what your soul has already begun to forget. Sometimes the problem isn't what you're facing, but what it's doing to your faith. Anxiety has a subtle and brutal way of corroding the soul. It doesn't arrive screaming, but suffocates you silently. It starts with a simple worry, then takes over your focus, your energy, your sleep. And before you know it, even your prayers have lost their intensity. You no longer have the strength to cry out as before. You're no longer certain that God is still listening, and then you feel distant. But you're not sure when this distance began. All you know is that even though you still believe, something inside you is fading. And the cruelest part of all is that even though you love God, you begin to feel like you're disappointing him because your faith seems to be withering amidst the weight you carry. Elijah felt it. Yes, Elijah, the prophet who defied kings, who saw fire come down from heaven, who defeated hundreds of false prophets in a historic spiritual confrontation. But it was precisely after the greatest victory of his life that he entered his deepest valley. After the confrontation on Mount Carmel, Queen Jezebel threatened his life, and the man who had bravely faced multitudes now fled in fear. In 1 Kings 19, we read that Elijah went into the wilderness and, sitting under a juniper tree, prayed that he might die. "It is enough, Lord, take my life," 1 Kings 19:4. This was not a prayer of unbelief. It was the cry of someone exhausted who saw no way out, who felt alone. Even knowing all that God had already done for him, anxiety had infiltrated Elijah's spirit like poison. Maybe you're feeling this way. You know God's presence. You've had remarkable moments with him. You've overcome giants. But now everything seems different. Worries have piled up. Your soul is tired. Your heart is restless. And the silence you once heard as rest now feels like abandonment. You try to pray, but you can't finish your sentences. You try to read the Bible, but your mind wanders with problems. You even blame yourself for this because you feel like you're drifting away from God when all you wanted was to run into his arms. But God's answer to Elijah was as gentle as it was profound. First, he didn't shout. He didn't rebuke. He didn't demand. He sent an angel, and the angel touched Elijah and said, "Get up and eat." 1 Kings 19:5. After that again, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too far." 1 Kings 19:7. God didn't treat the prophet harshly. but kindly careful. He knew that before he could continue, Elijah needed to be restored, nourished, welcomed. Because there are times when heaven doesn't wait for a perfect prayer, just a soul willing to not give up. The journey to Mount Horeb took 40 days, and there in the hiding place of a cave, God reveals himself, not through a strong wind, nor an earthquake, nor fire, but through a whisper, a gentle breeze. Because God doesn't need noise to restore an anxious soul. He reveals himself in stillness and he asks, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" 1 Kings 19:9. It wasn't a geographical question. It was a question of identity. Who are you? Still lives within you? Or have you let fear kill what I placed within you? Many today are trapped in these inner caves, tired, disillusioned, drowning in their own anxiety. And the most devastating thing is that the more anxious they are, the more distant they feel from God, as if his presence were a place only the strong enter. But what Elijah shows us is that even the more faithful also get sick inside. Even the most spiritual people can feel like giving up, and that doesn't disqualify anyone. It doesn't diminish your faith, it just shows that you need tourist before continuing to fight. Anxiety takes away your ground, your vision, your control. But God says, I still have something for you. In 1 Kings 19:18, the Lord reveals that there are 7,000 prophets Elijah thought were dead, but who still stand firm. Elijah wasn't as alone as he thought, and neither are you. Despair is a liar. It distorts reality, erases promises, makes it seem like all is lost. But there is a peace that doesn't come from the absence of problems. It comes from certainty that God is still present, even when you don't feel it, even when you're weak, even when your prayer is just a whisper, still, He's listening. If this word reached your weary heart, write in the comments, "Even though I'm down, I still believe." Let this be your prayer, a declaration of spiritual endurance, a cry of faith coming from within your emotional cave. But there is something even more delicate and more dangerous, because there's a kind of pain that's invisible but silently destroys you from within. The difficulty in trusting fully, even when you believe in God. You're about to see how surrendering control hurts, but it's exactly the path to finding the peace your heart so desperately seeks. What comes next may challenge the way you've always viewed trusting in the Lord. There are times when you even want to trust God, but you simply can't. It's not disbelief, it's trauma. It's the fear of surrender and loss. It's the memory of everything that has fallen apart before, even when you were praying. You look to the sky and say, I want to trust, but what if I'm disappointed again? This struggle doesn't happen in your head. It lives deep within your heart, in the place where you want to rest, but are still armed, where you want to surrender, but still hold on tightly. Because trusting is dangerous for those who have been hurt. And perhaps this is the greatest war within you, the conflict between the faith that invites you to let go and the fear that convinces you to maintain control. This silent pain was faced by someone well known in Scripture, a man who heard God's voice directly, who left everything behind, and yet had to face the most difficult moment of his life, giving up what he loved most. Abraham waited for years for the promise of a son. Time passed, age advanced, hope wavered, but the promise arrived. Isaac was born. Joy finally lived in that tent. Abraham could breathe in peace until one day God said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and offer him as a burnt offering. Genesis 22:2. There was no logic. There was no explanation. Just a call to trust in the dark. Now, imagine Abraham's heart. Every step toward Mount Moriah was a step against everything that made sense. This was no ordinary sacrifice. He was the son of promise. It was the fulfillment of what God himself had said. How could he deliver what God promised? How could he offer on the altar precisely what gave meaning to his faith? And yet, Abraham obeyed. The Bible says he rose early, prepared the wood, took Isaac, and went up, in silence, in surrender, in absolute obedience. This doesn't mean it was easy. It means Abraham chose to trust, even with a torn heart. Maybe you're in that exact place, holding something in your hands that's too precious to give up, a relationship, a dream, a project, something you love so much that the mere thought of leaving it in God's hands scares you. because you believe that if you let go, you might lose it. But there's a powerful truth hidden in this text. Abraham didn't give Isaac up to lose him. He gave him up to discover that God had already provided something greater. At that very moment, when the altar was prepared, the knife raised, God cried out from heaven, "Do not lay your hand on the boy. Now I know that you fear God." Genesis 22:12. And right then and there, a lamb caught in the bushes became the substitute. God will provide. The anxiety you feel today may not be a lack of faith, but an excess of control. You try to hold on to the future, the answers, the paths, but trusting God requires letting go. And letting go hurts, because it makes us vulnerable. It forces us to stop fighting alone. But it is also in this place of vulnerability that the promised peace begins to emerge. Not the peace of circumstances, but the peace of knowing they are being guided. Even if they don't understand the path Abraham called that place, the Lord will provide. And that name echoes to this day every time someone chooses to trust rather than control. Have you ever noticed how fear tries to disguise itself as prudence? It whispers, "Wait a little longer. Don't give in yet. You might regret it." But there are times when the only way to live fully is to blindly trust the one who sees everything. If God is asking you to surrender something, it's not because he wants to take it away. It's because he wants to show you that there is a provision you haven't yet seen, a peace you only experience when you let go of control and open your heart. Your Moriah may not be a literal mountain, but an inner place where you need to make a radical decision. Keep it in your hand, or return it to God's hand. Trusting is an act of courage, but it's also a spiritual choice. It's saying, "God, even if I don't understand, I surrender. Even if it hurts, I trust. Even if it seems like a setback, I walk." Because this is the essence of faith. Walking without seeing, resting without controlling, obeying without understanding. And on this path, you will realize something extraordinary. The more you trust, the lighter you become. Because the peace that God promised is not on the side of the one who holds, but on the side of the one who lets go. If this word confronted your fear of losing control, write in the comments, "I choose to trust, even with my heart trembling." Declare this as a prayer, a spiritual challenge, a real surrender. Because sometimes the true miracle happens not when God changes the situation, but when he transforms you in the midst of it. But what if the greatest test of faith is not surrendering, but remaining weak? What's to come will challenge your need to appear strong all the time and show that true strength comes when you have the courage to admit you can't do it alone. What comes next may redefine what it means to be strong before God. Some battles don't hurt the muscles, but the spirit. They don't leave marks on the body, but they leave the soul exhausted. And it's precisely this kind of weariness that eats away at you, the weight of pretending everything is fine, when in reality you're struggling to simply stay standing. You pray, but you don't feel it. You praise, but you're silent inside. You follow, but you no longer know if you're going by faith or just habit. There's a pain many carry secretly, the obligation to be strong all the time, to appear firm while everything inside is falling apart, to comfort others, even when you yourself need a hug. The pressure to maintain control, to cope, to keep the ball rolling, creates an emotional burden that wasn't meant to be carried alone. The world expects strength. Religion demands unwavering faith. But what about when your prayers are interrupted by tears? When your mind cries out for peace and you find no relief? When you try to keep up appearances, but your inner self is screaming for help? Many people confuse faith with invulnerability, but God's word shows exactly the opposite. Paul, one of the greatest apostles, who saw miracles, founded churches, and wrote letters that still edify us today, carried a thorn in his flesh, something that constantly hurt him. He asked the Lord 3 times to remove it, but the answer was surprising. "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness," 2 Corinthians 12:9. Instead of healing, Paul received grace. Instead of relief, he received presence. God didn't remove the thorn. He revealed that even in suffering, his peace can sustain us. This changes everything, because we live trying to prove strength, trying to maintain a standard, trying to show unshakable faith, while God is calling us to rest in His grace. Paul understood this so much so that he concluded, "Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me." 2 Corinthians 12:9. He no longer ran from pain. He no longer tried to hide his weakness. He embraced the place of dependence because he discovered that it is in exhaustion that true strength begins. Maybe you're trying to be the rock for everyone, holding things together, the house, the emotions, the spiritual life. Maybe you think if you let your guard down, everything will fall apart. But listen to this. You weren't called to carry everything on your shoulders. There is a God who holds the universe in the palm of His hand, and He doesn't need you to pretend to be okay to extend the peace that only He can give. Sometimes, the greatest demonstration of faith isn't to keep fighting. It's to admit you need rest. It's not to hold firm. It's to let yourself fall into the Father's arms. Being strong all the time is a suffocating lie, an isolating emotional prison. You don't need to prove anything to God. He already knows where it hurts. He already knows how hard you've tried. He already knows the nights you cry in secret, the prayers you haven't finished, the sighs you let out during the day when no one is looking, and He says, "My grace is sufficient." Don't try to overcome with your strength. Trust in the provision that comes from above. The peace you seek is not in control. It is in surrender. Remember, Jesus wept, Jesus sweated blood. Jesus said, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful even to death." Matthew 26:38. If the Son of God Himself didn't hide His pain, why do you think you need to hide yours? God doesn't want an unbreakable soldier. He wants a sincere son, a heart willing to say, "Father, I can't do it. Help me." And it's in this kind of prayer that heaven opens. It's in this kind of surrender that the Lord's presence invades with comfort, guidance, and true rest. You don't have to keep pretending to be strong. You can stop. You can breathe. You can cry. You can say, "Today I just need to be welcomed." Because the Lord of hosts is also the God of tenderness. The Lion of Judah is also the Lamb who welcomes. And He is with you now, not to charge but to sustain, not to demand, but to renew. You can stop trying to carry it all alone. God wants to be the strength you don't have. And this truth can free you from a lifetime of pressure and forced self-sufficiency. If this word has exposed you with love and truth, declare in the comments, "I surrender to God's grace. I don't want to be strong alone." Let this be your public prayer, your visible surrender, your step out of the prison of demands, an act of faith that says, "I'm not strong all the time, but He is, and that's enough for me." But there is an even more silent pain, which no one sees, but which cries out night and day for relief. There are tears you share with no one, sighs no one hears, and prayers that seem to never reach the ceiling. What comes next may be the answer your heart so desperately yearns for, because perhaps the healing you need isn't in being heard by others, but in being remembered by God. There are pains that can't be shouted. They're only kept inside tears that don't flow in public, just fall silently onto the pillow. The soul cries out for relief, but the mouth remains silent so as not to worry anyone. Have you ever experienced this kind of pain? The kind no one asks about because you've learned to smile with it hidden. A silent sadness that seems to have no place even in prayers, because even then, you no longer know what to say. And that's when a dangerous thought arises. Has God forgotten me? It's easy to believe in God's care when everything is going well. But what about when all you have is a weary whisper and a prayer that sounds more like a sob? Hannah experienced this. A woman who carried the weight of an intimate and constant pain, the absence of a child. In the culture of her time, this was seen almost as a punishment, a social shame. Peninnah, her husband's other wife, constantly provoked her. And although Elkanah loved her, Hannah could find no comfort. Because when the emptiness is within the heart, no external affection can fill it. The text of 1 Samuel 1 presents us with a Hannah who rose from the table where everyone was, went to the temple, and with a bitter soul, wept abundantly before the Lord. She prayed with her lips, but without making a sound, only her heart spoke. And yet, it was enough for God to hear. The priest Eli, seeing her praying in this way, thought she was drunk. But Hannah replied, "No, my lord, I am a woman of a sorrowful spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have poured out my soul before the Lord." 1 Samuel 1:15. This phrase carries a depth that few understand. There are prayers that don't follow rituals, but tear the heart apart. There are times when trusting in God is simply remaining, even without answers, even in silence, even when it seems nothing changes. And that's precisely where the miracle begins. The Bible says that after this prayer, Hannah returned home with a transformed countenance. The scene was still the same. No promise had yet been fulfilled. But something inside her changed, because when you pour out your soul before God, something invisible is restored, the inner peace that comes from surrender. And sometime later, Hannah conceives a son, Samuel. But the most beautiful detail of the story is that the verse says, "And the Lord remembered her." 1 Samuel 1:19. The God who seems silent was listening all along. Do you need that same reminder today? Is your silent pain screaming at heaven, but you've stopped believing that anyone truly cares? Know this: God sees what no one else sees. He hears what the world ignores. He collects every tear, even the ones you never had the courage to shed. Psalm 56:8 declares, "You have gathered my tears into your bottle. Are they not in your book?" Nothing escapes the Father's eyes. No pain is too small for him to feel. Faith isn't a loud cry. Sometimes it's just a glance toward heaven saying, "Help me not to give up." And perhaps that's your prayer today. The peace promised by God doesn't depend on the number of words you say, but on the sincerity with which you pour out your heart. And Anna teaches us that there is a path where crying becomes a miracle, not because everything suddenly changes, but because those who pray begin to see life with new eyes. True trust in God is born not from the absence of pain, but from the certainty that He is still present, even when all you can do is cry. If this word touched the silent part of your soul, comment now, "Lord, remember me." Let this be your cry. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be loud. Just true God doesn't reject broken hearts. And if there's pain inside, there's room for healing. But there's something even deeper. Because there are people who aren't just sad, they're confused. They feel lost, without purpose, as if they're wandering aimlessly. What you're about to discover may reveal that your identity in God is greater than any label, loss, or inner turmoil. Get ready, because this next truth may redefine everything you believed about your own story. There's a pain that doesn't bleed, but gnaws at you. The feeling that your life has no direction. You wake up, do what needs to be done, smile when expected, answer the basics. But inside, everything feels empty. It's like you're going around in circles, trying to find a meaning to carry on, but no matter how hard you try, it still feels like you're wasting time. The hardest part about this pain is that it has no name. It's a kind of fatigue disguised as routine. It's an emptiness no one notices, but it grows day by day, turning even what was once beautiful into something rote. And deep down, the question that won't go away is, does God still have a plan for me? Jeremiah was also overcome by this insecurity. Still young, without influence, resources, or experience, he received a word that would change his entire life. The Lord told him, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I ordained you as a prophet to the nations." Jeremiah 1:5. It's a powerful statement, but Jeremiah's response reveals the internal conflict that many experience to this day. "Ah, Lord God, I cannot speak, for I am only a child." He didn't feel ready. He didn't think he was capable. He didn't believe he had what it took. But God didn't ask him to trust himself. He only asked, trust in His word. This story confronts us because it exposes a painful truth. Often, it's not that God is silent. It's that we're so consumed by comparison, fear, and self-demand that we fail to hear what He's already declared about us. Jeremiah thought he was too young. What about you? What's your excuse? Too old? Too weak? Too sinful? Too little educated? None of this surprises God. When He calls you, He already knows your limitations, but He's also already placed within you what is necessary to fulfill His purpose. The big problem is that insecurity, fueled by anxiety and comparison, steals the peace God promised. And little by little, you begin to believe that living with heaviness is normal, that feeling directionless is the norm. But that's not true. What's missing isn't a new path, but the courage to trust what God has already spoken about you. Even if you don't see everything now, the promise remains alive. The peace God offers isn't born from a complete understanding of the plan, but from complete trust in the one who laid out that plan from the womb. Perhaps today you feel out of place, as if you were in the wrong world, in the wrong season, on the wrong mission. But God's answer continues to echo through the centuries. Do not say, I am only a child. You shall go to everyone I send you, and speak whatever I command you. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you to deliver you. Jeremiah 1:7-8. You don't need to know everything. You don't need to understand everything. You just need to trust that God is guiding you, even when your feet are shaking. Don't let doubt erase the promise. Don't let fear paralyze the mission. And above all, don't let the world's silence convince you that you don't carry something precious within you. God saw you before the world knew you. He had already prepared every step before you even took the first. What you need now is to stop hiding behind excuses and rise up, even when afraid, trusting that heaven supports you. Your purpose is not lost. It is just waiting for the moment when you have the courage to trust in God more than in your own limitations. If this message addressed your doubt, write in the comments, God, remind me who I am in you. Declare this as an act of redemption, a prayer for identity, a cry for direction. Because sometimes the greatest miracle isn't finding a new path, but remembering that yours was already written by the Creator's hands. But what happens when, even though you believe in your purpose, you still suffer pain that no one understands? What follows will show you that even the most faithful righteous have gone through moments when even faith seemed insufficient to endure the pain. And when you understand what God revealed in the midst of affliction, everything can change. There are times when not even crying can convey the pain. Moments when despair doesn't manifest itself in screams, but creeps silently within the chest. The soul cries out, but no one listens. People ask, "How are you?" And you answer, "I'm fine," because you've already understood that no one is ready to hear the truth. There's a kind of suffering that has no form, no name, no logic, and therefore finds no solace. An anguish that takes over the heart, even when everything around seems normal. It's the inner, invisible chaos, the crushing weight of being alive yet feeling shattered inside. And the worst part? You look around and realize that no one would understand. Not even if you tried to explain. Job experienced this pain. He was a man of integrity, God-fearing, blessed with family, health, and wealth. But suddenly everything fell apart. His children died. His possessions were stolen. His body was covered in wounds. And to make matters worse, his friends, who should have welcomed him, accused him. His wife, who should have comforted him, told him to curse God and die. Imagine losing everything and still being judged guilty of your suffering. Job felt isolated, misunderstood, betrayed. He looked to the heavens and couldn't understand why God had allowed such pain. He didn't blaspheme, but questioned. He didn't lose faith, but demanded answers. How long will you not leave me or let me go until I swallow my own saliva? Job 7:19, a cry from someone who feels forgotten, abandoned, on the verge of giving up. How many times have you felt this way? As if the pain inside you were too deep to explain. As if God were silent and the world oblivious to your pain. Have you ever tried to justify your suffering to someone and felt even more guilty for not being able to explain it? That's what makes this kind of despair so suffocating. The fact that it's lonely, but there is hope, and it's found in Job's words even in the midst of extreme pain. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and that at the last he will stand upon the earth. Job 19:25. He had nothing left, but he still held this conviction: God is alive, and he has not forgotten me. This statement changes everything because it didn't come in a moment of glory, but at rock bottom. Job was hurt, abandoned, wronged, but even without seeing, he chose to trust. Even without understanding, he chose to wait. And it was this unexplained faith that sustained him. This reveals something powerful. The peace that God promises does not depend on understanding everything, but on trusting even when nothing makes sense. The spiritual relief that heals the soul does not come from answers, but from the presence of a Redeemer who lives even when he seems absent. You don't need to pretend everything is fine to be loved by God. He doesn't demand emotional coherence to offer comfort. He only expects sincerity. Job poured out his heart to God and was heard. Perhaps you need to do the same today. Don't you have all the words? God understands your groans. Don't you know how to pray? God translates your silences. Do you feel like no one understands you? The Lord sees you from within, and He doesn't judge you. He welcomes you. This is the peace the world doesn't understand. The calm that comes not when everything is resolved, but when the heart surrenders its pain to a living God. Even without seeing, declare, "My Redeemer lives." Even in the midst of despair, confess, God remains with me, because trusting in God is not denying pain. It is recognizing that it will not have the final word. If this message spoke to you, write in the comments. Even without understanding, I trust that my Redeemer lives. Let this phrase be your cry of faith in the midst of chaos, your spiritual surrender before a God who remains in control, even when all seems lost. But there's something even deeper that no one told you. There comes a time when even prayer seems useless, and what Jesus did at that moment can completely change the way you view your pain. What follows isn't just a story, it's a revelation that may be what your soul has always silently cried out for. There comes a time when the soul falls silent, not because it has found peace, but because it has grown tired of screaming. A time when your knees still buckle, but your heart no longer feels. The words of prayer come out, but they seem to stay above the ceiling. You pray but feel like nothing changes. You pray but the pain persists. You pray and you begin to wonder if God is still listening. The truth is, there's a kind of pain that robs you of even the strength to believe, a spiritual exhaustion that arises when you surrender everything, and yet it seems like heaven remains closed. Have you ever been there? Have you prayed until you were exhausted and wondered if you were talking to the wind? Have you ever considered stopping praying because all you feel is silence? Jesus went through this. Yes, the Son of God. On the darkest night of his life, in the Garden of Gethsemane, he faced the anguish of carrying the full weight of humanity's sin. He knew what was coming: betrayal, abandonment, humiliation, and the cross. He knew that in the hours that followed, he would experience unimaginable physical and spiritual pain. And yet, he went to pray. The Bible says, "Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said, 'Sit here while I go over there and pray.'" Matthew 26:36. He took Peter, James, and John with him, but even they could not understand the depth of Jesus' anguish. While praying, Jesus fell face down and pleaded, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." Matthew 26:39. Jesus prayed, and no answer came. He returned, found the disciples sleeping, and prayed again and again. Silence. For the third time, he prayed the same words, and again, no external change. No angel appeared, no voice from heaven was heard. Nothing changed around him, but something changed within him. The strength Jesus needed came not from a change in circumstances, but from total surrender to the Father's will. There, in that silent garden, Jesus taught us the most profound form of prayer, one that does not seek deliverance, but connection, not an escape from pain, but an alliance with purpose, not an immediate relief, but an eternal surrender. Perhaps today you're in your own Gethsemane alone, tired, feeling like praying no longer makes a difference. But look at Jesus. He showed that praying, even without feeling, is trusting. Praying, even without an answer, is declaring, "Father, I continue to choose you." Praying, even when everything seems useless, is the greatest act of faith anyone can perform, because true faith isn't feeling. It's following. It's trusting in the peace God promises, even without understanding. It's continuing to pray not to change God's will, but so that His will transforms you from within. Gethsemane was the beginning of the way of the cross, but it was also the place where Jesus internally won the greatest spiritual battle, the battle of not giving up. And that may be your struggle today. You feel like giving up on faith, on hope, on believing that there is still peace in the midst of so much pain. But God brought you here to remind you, the prayer that seems useless is often the one that transforms the most. What you feel as silence may be heaven working in silence. What you call delay, God calls preparation. And what hurts you today will one day be a testament to rebirth. Gethsemane was a place of tears, but also of decision, a place of solitude, but also of submission. And if you are going through your own dark night, know that even the Son of God felt the weight you feel now, but he didn't run away. He prayed, he wept, he trusted. And because of his faithfulness, today you can be embraced by the Father's presence. So, even if you feel like praying no longer makes sense, keep going. Because there is a peace that only comes when you surrender, and it comes when you say, "Thy will be done." If this word has found your heart in silence, declare in the comments, "Lord, even without feeling it, I continue to pray." Let this be your surrender, your step of faith, a public confession that you will not stop talking to God, even when the heavens seem silent. Because sometimes, the true miracle isn't seeing the storm cease. It's discovering that your soul lives on despite it. But what comes now is even deeper, because there is a prison that is not in the circumstances, but in the thoughts themselves. And when you understand what the Word says about this, your mind can finally experience the peace you have been seeking for so long. There are pains no one sees because they don't bleed in the body, but tear from within. They are the invisible battles that rage in the silence of the mind. When no one is around and thoughts begin to scream, that's when true chaos sets in. It's like being trapped inside yourself, spinning in circles between guilt, fear, and anxiety. Thoughts that won't shut up, ideas that repeat themselves, scenes from the past that replay like an endless film. The mind becomes a battlefield, and even when everything around seems peaceful, inside, everything is in ruins. Have you ever felt this? Have you tried to sleep and been overcome by thoughts? Have you ever prayed but been interrupted by inner voices saying, "You'll never get out of this"? It's difficult to explain to others. Sometimes even those close to you think it's an exaggeration, weakness, or lack of faith. But what few understand is that this is a real prison, a jail built by disordered thoughts, unhealed traumas, and distorted beliefs. The Bible speaks to this clearly when Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 10:5, taking every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. This phrase isn't poetic, it's a spiritual command. Paul recognized that a Christian's greatest battle takes place in the mind, and more than that, he knew there's only one way to find true peace, bringing thoughts under God's control. Paul wasn't writing this from a place of comfort. He was a man facing rejection, persecution, and loneliness. But he discovered something that transformed his life, that thoughts, even when they seem uncontrollable, can be overcome with truth. And truth has a name, Jesus. What does this mean in practice? It means that when your mind is imprisoning you with memories of the past, you can say, "I have been forgiven." When fearful thoughts about the future arise, declare, "God is in control." When thoughts of inferiority try to paralyze you, remember, "I am a beloved child." This isn't a magic formula. It's a daily spiritual exercise, submission of the mind to the kingdom of peace. The problem is that many give up before fighting, because they believe the lie that if their thoughts haven't changed yet, they never will. But that's exactly what the enemy wants you to believe. He knows that if he can control your mind, he will distance you from God's presence. Because it's difficult to trust, rest, or worship when you're mentally oppressed. But there is a truth that breaks this prison. The peace promised by God does not arise from the absence of bad thoughts, but from the constant presence of truth in the midst of them. Maybe your mind is sick, tired, confused. Maybe you even blame yourself for not being able to stop thinking. But know this, God doesn't condemn you for feeling this way. He wants to heal you, and this healing begins when you exchange self-defense for surrender. When you say, "Lord, my mind is a battlefield, but I invite you to fight with me." This is faith. It's trusting that God not only visits wounded hearts, but also inhabits afflicted ones, and he has the power to completely transform your way of thinking. You don't have to accept this mental suffering as final. You don't have to remain trapped in this cycle. It's not normal to live in constant fear, endless guilt, and self-sabotaging voices hammering away day and night. God didn't create you to live in torment. but in freedom. And that freedom begins when you recognize that you don't have to fight alone. Paul also wrote in Philippians 4:7, "And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." Notice, this is no ordinary peace. It is a peace that transcends logic. It doesn't make human sense, but it does make sense in heaven. And this peace is available today. If your mind has been your biggest battleground, write in the comments, "Lord, renew my mind with your peace." Let this be your spiritual declaration, your cry for help, your decision to stop fighting alone. It's time to begin declaring war against lies. And war here means silencing the inner noise and trusting fully in heaven's truth. But there's something deeper that few realize. There are times when it seems like everything around you is falling apart. Family, faith, emotional structure. And when that happens, it feels like God is gone. But what David experienced in his darkest hour may be exactly what you need to discover today. There are times when life seems to fall apart all at once. Nothing is going right, and everything that was once certain crumbles before your eyes. Your emotional structure is fragile, your spiritual strength is depleted, and the relationships around you are in ruin. It's like being in the middle of a battlefield where you've lost almost everything, except your breath, and even that is hanging by a thread. At these times, prayer seems like a weak whisper against a deafening storm. You feel like you're at rock bottom, and worst of all, with no one looking down on you. If your soul has ever experienced this kind of despair, when everything seems to collapse at once, then you'll understand exactly what David experienced in Ziklag. David was exhausted. Even before becoming king, he had faced betrayal, rejection, persecution, and restless nights. And just when it seemed the worst was over, Ziklag arrived. A place that should have been his refuge, his rest, was consumed by fire. The Amalekites invaded the city while David and his men were away. They took their wives, their children, and everything they owned. When David arrived and saw the smoke rising, the ground disappeared beneath his feet. The Bible describes it in 1 Samuel 34. Then David and the people who were with him lifted up their voices and wept until they had no more power to weep. Imagine that level of pain. A warrior defeated not by the sword, but by the collapse of his soul. But it doesn't stop there. Those who walked with David, the same men who fought alongside him in so many battles, now spoke of stoning him. He didn't just lose his family. He lost support, leadership, and for a moment, even his dignity. Perhaps that's how you feel now. Betrayed by circumstances, abandoned by those you trusted, and suffocated by a pain you no longer know how to hide. When everything seems to be falling apart, even breathing becomes an effort. But it was at this very point in history that a turning point occurred, a movement that changed not the landscape, but David's heart. Verse 6 says, "But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. In the midst of tragedy, rejection, and utter darkness, he found strength not around him, but within. David had no immediate answer. He had no human comfort, but he had enough faith to rise spiritually. He sought direction. He prayed. He consulted the Lord, and the answer was clear. Pursue, for you will surely obtain and set free. What God did was not just return what was taken. He returned purpose, clarity, and a peace that does not depend on the absence of war, but from the presence of trust. And this is what the Lord wants you to understand today. When everything seems to be falling apart, there is a place where you can find resuscitation. Not in yourself, not in others, but in Him. Maybe you're waiting for God to fix everything around you, but He wants to restore everything within you first. The peace that surpasses all understanding isn't born when the fire goes out. It's born when, even amidst the ashes, you can say, "I still trust." David didn't stay prostrate. He rose, led, and conquered. But external victory began with the internal decision to trust, even when it seemed impossible. Maybe God won't put out the fire around you right away today, but He can begin right now to breathe life into the ashes of your soul. And that's more powerful than any change of scenery. Because true confidence is not the absence of despair, it is the presence of hope in the midst of chaos. So, if everything around you is crumbling, if your faith seems small, your strength drained, and your peace lost, know this: God is still writing your story. And this dark page is not the end. It's just the place where he proves that his word is greater than any ruin. Breathe, pray, reawaken. The same God who restored David in Ziklag is present now. And he whispers to your heart, stop worrying, trust me. I am still God, and I will give you peace. If everything around you seems to be in ruins, write in the comments, Lord, revive my soul in the ashes. Let this phrase be your prayer, your surrender, your public declaration that, even without seeing tomorrow, you choose to trust in the God who never loses control. This is not just a phrase, it is an act of faith, a request for a new beginning, a cry from someone who has decided not to die in the midst of battle. And now that you've come this far, know this journey doesn't end in pain. What you received throughout this video wasn't just content. It was an invitation to live in another dimension, the dimension of complete trust. Because when you understand that God's peace doesn't depend on circumstances, you stop despairing and start living with purpose. What comes next can be the most powerful new beginning of your life. If you've made it this far, it's no accident. None of this is coincidence. Every word you heard, every tear that perhaps fell while listening, every tightness in your chest, all of this is part of a divine movement that has already begun within you. Throughout this message, we've seen that even when everything seems out of control, even when fear screams, guilt suffocates, the mind wanders, and the heart breaks, there is a God who is not silent, is not absent, and does not fail. A God who today tells you with firmness and tenderness, stop worrying, trust in me, and I will give you peace. This peace isn't just a passing feeling, it's a refuge, a rock, a rest for the weary soul. You no longer have to try to be strong all the time. You don't have to pretend everything is fine, when, in fact, inside, everything is falling apart. God saw your chaos, heard your silence, and decided to act, and he chose this very moment to begin this healing. Now that this truth has been planted in your heart, it's time to seal it in prayer. But first, take a deep breath. Close your eyes if you can allow yourself to be vulnerable. This is the most important moment of your day, because as you pray, heaven moves. As you surrender, peace begins to blossom. Let us pray together now. Lord, at this moment I present to you every heart that has come this far. Every weary mind, every soul in despair, every tear that has fallen in secret. You know the invisible battles, the unconfessed fears, the pain that no one else understands. Today, God, we come before you, not as warriors who know what to do, but as children who need to be embraced. We surrender to you all the worries that have kept us awake at night, all the voices that try to silence our faith. We ask, visit the darkest places within us with your light. Break the chains of anxiety, guilt, and doubt. Cover every thought with your peace. May your spirit come now as a balm upon the wounds of the soul. Revive the weary, strengthen the weak. Restore the broken, because only you, Lord, can bring life where today there is only rubble. We believe even through tears we trust, even trembling. We hope even in the dark because you are God. And in you, finally, we find rest in Jesus' name, amen. If you prayed this prayer sincerely, know this. Something powerful has begun. God is working in areas you never imagined. And if that word spoke to you, what you will discover in the video on the screen now can change your life even more. What follows is not just a continuation of a message, is the next step in your healing, restoration, and liberation process. Don't ignore it. Don't put it off. Because what's to come may be exactly what your soul has been silently crying out for. Write in the comments now, I made it to the end. This is more than a phrase. It's a testimony, a sign that you haven't given up, that you've listened to the end because something inside you knows God is calling you to a new time. Share this video with someone you love, someone who may be suffering in silence and needs that same peace. Be a channel of healing in someone's life. And if this message touched your heart, subscribe to the channel. Here, each content is made with prayer, with dedication, and with a purpose, bringing people like you closer to God. Your registration isn't just a click. It's an act of reciprocity, a seed of faith you plant today. The Lord gives strength to his people. The Lord blesses his people with peace. Psalm 29:11. You are not alone, you never were. Now, Click on the next video and continue this journey. What you're about to hear could be the turning point in your life.